We're now going to talk about another major leader in the world of technology. We're first going to hear from his brother. That gentleman you just saw for a split second is a man named Dan Case. Unfortunately, he's now deceased. Not long after this interview, he discovered he had a brain tumor. And he was head of, I want to say Chase H&Q. I mean, the investment banks here changed names as they got swallowed up by bigger and bigger banks, so I'm always tripping over exactly where he was. But a very good guy. And when I started asking about his brother, Steve Case, because I was profiling him, and asking sort of those tender personal questions about childhood and psychological development and how Steve Case thinks, you're on risky ground. He opened right up, got it right immediately. Steve Case had a nickname at AOL that most people don't know about called the Wall. He would sit in meetings, large and small, interviews with people, and there would be this blank expression on his face. No one could read him. It was unnerving to people. And the reason was that he was observing as much as participating. When I asked Dan Case, I said, what is this whole thing about the Wall? What is that all about? Was that anything in your childhood? Did he do that? And Dan Case said, oh yeah, Steve was always an expert at participating and watching.
Steve was always good at participating and watching. I think maybe that's why this interactive medium, which is so personal, but in its early experience was less personal, he so innately understood.
So think about it. This is kind of a hyper-awareness. This is someone who's involved, trying things, experiencing new things. And when they were kids, they had their own little entrepreneurial businesses. They had paper routes, and then they tried to sell magazines, and then they tried to sell other stuff to the paper route recipients. And then in college, Steve Case managed a band, and he was always doing things, but he always was watching at the same time. This whole issue that Andy Grove was talking about, an alertness, putting one's self-ego aside and watching. So when I went out to AOL and interviewed Steve Case, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get pushback maybe, maybe not. He warmed right up to the subject.
Being able to soak things up, just sort of, it's almost like a pattern recognition experiment. Hearing this, reading this, seeing that, thinking that, being able to connect the dots in your own mind, even though they're not so easily connectable. That is kind of having a pulse to what's happening.
This is what Maslow had to say about it. These very alert, very aware, very observant people are like the child in the fable who saw that the emperor had no clothes on. These people can see the fresh, the raw, the concrete. They live far more in the real world of nature than the verbalized world of concepts, abstractions, expectations, beliefs, and stereotypes that most people confuse with the real world. One quick note on this subject, and that is wild animals, free creatures, are very, very alert because survival depends upon it. And so, just as Maslow's pointing out that little children who don't have a lot of built-up biases, they don't have philosophical paradigms in which they live and they think they understand everything, they see things in a fresh way. Wild animals are sensory dominated. They always see everything in a fresh way, because if they don't, they won't last long.
For videotape and more of the great leaders cited in the speech, go to successtelevision.biz.